So here are my impressions of the symbiote review. I used it for about 2 weeks during an annual hog hunt that I do with two of my closest friends. We ended up taking about 24 pigs between December 6th and January 6th of this year. I'm going to start off with initial impressions, talk about how those initial impressions changed once I got into the field. If you're looking for a TLDR, what do I think of the symbiote? I think it's the best mount of this type I've tried, but there are a bunch of caveats that come with that. So let's dig into it. So my initial impressions. If you're not familiar with product design, a PRD, a product requirements document, the PRD on this was really well designed. It's a mount targeted for consumers. It can handle any night vision and thermal configuration you have. It's adjustable in 3 dimensions. So that would be like height and in and out, and forward and back. So that's super important. And it's a package for retail sale. So no matter what, like as you're like dealing with a night vision person, you're like, oh, I'm new to this whole thing and I've got product A and product B. What mount do I need? Like you can just tell your salespeople, sell them the symbiote. It works. And so I think from a PRD perspective, like what were the requirements that the engineers were given? I think that it makes a lot of sense. The downside is it doesn't look like a premium product right out of the box. Like it looks like the second or third gen of what like your buddy made on his Bamboo Labs kind of printer. I know arkyne has said some big things about its durability and the testing they've put it through. And honestly, after using it for 2 weeks in dusty, gross, bad weather, like, night vision, took a spill. I ran into a piece of farm equipment. I didn't see it at shin height and busted up my shin and ate it. Like the symbiote mount did fine. It totally mechanically worked. But there were like holes that still had like print fill and you can like see the lines. And I think probably the best comparison is going to be to just show y'all side by side. This is the Noise Fighters Pano Bridge. It's also a 3D printed product, but it feels like it's a premium product, whereas this has a whole lot of just DIY feel to it. And especially for a mount that's this expensive, like I bought it the week it was announced, so that's not what you get a deal. It's not a cheap price. But they did sell it. It was expensive mount. When you're talking about a G24 and you're like, man, that's $500, and you're like, yeah, but at least it feels nice when I get it in my hand. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Some screw holes went round, those kinds of things. And I'll throw in some B-roll of some of the issues that I found with the photos that I had. The mum rail, which I use to connect, I'm running a MH25, which is the older school version, and a PVS 14 that's in a M14. It's the Knights housing. I found that as I pushed that mum rail on, it shaved some of the 3D printed material away, which like at the time made me go, ugh, like is this actually going to hold tight? But since that trip, the battery housing, I actually cracked the battery housing on my MH25 during that trip, sent it off to iReady USA. By the way, their warranty is awesome. Had it back to me in like 6 days from when it left my house, with a new body that was completely repaired and watertight again. So that was pretty good. I like the dual dovetail idea. Like I think being able to actually hand off a thermal, like that was one of the places where I didn't know how useful that feature was going to be. And we ended up using it. There were times where I think probably the best example was we were driving around and, I'm seeing these awkward thermal shapes that are like, have like some flicker to them, which I was like, I don't think that's an animal, but it could be. Turns out the ranch owner had gone and lit a bunch of brush fires on piles that he had set up earlier in the week. There was a still wind and we had rain on the forecast. And so what I was seeing the infrared heat from a mesquite burn pile through mesquites that had not been cut down yet. And so that was That was the surprising thing. But when I was like, hey, I can't tell what this is, I don't know if it's worth going all the way over there, I was able to pop the thermal off my left eye, hand it to the driver, and have them look and give a second opinion. So I thought that was really cool. Because of the way the mini rail offsets from the thermal, you can't swap your right eye and your left eye. And I don't think that's, I don't think that's a design mistake. I think it's a reality of the fact that your rail is offset on a mum rail. And so it's just something to be aware of, that you can't change, even though the dovetails are the same, you can't change which side if you were to go dual dovetails. The dovetails were a little bit stiff. And while wearing the device, I found it hard to get the device back in. That alignment was a little difficult. That might be a practice thing, but either way, I did find it wasn't like I could do it while we were driving and click it back in. I had to stop and use both hands and those kinds of things. Compared to the Noise Fighters panel bridge, the thermal screen is about ½ inch lower compared to the bridge dovetail. And I think I've got some B-roll for this, but you can tell there's a dramatic thickness here, which wound up being not a big deal. G24 or an Rotos Losto, I just slid where the mount was on my head, and it was firmly inside of the travel. Instead of being at the bottom end of travel, I wound up being at the top end of travel, but that totally was an okay amount of travel, and it had no impact other than that was an adjustment I didn't make the very first time. I also adjusted the centerline mount to move both eyepieces away from my face, just to give it more room for my eye pro. So again, if you're setting this up for the first time and you're like, man, that feels a little tight, like go ahead and take them out, take it apart, drop it, swap what holes you're going through and move it out so that you have that adjustment that you need. Also the lanyard hole was a little, was too, I say thick, it wasn't big enough for the kinetic development nerd to loop through. So what I ended up doing was I ended up running it through, undoing the connection, unfeeding it through this taper, and this gives me the retention I need so that if my mount comes loose, it stays attached to my person. This is also how I keep my night vision retained in my case. So this Velcro goes on the inside of the case and allows me so that if somebody grabs it and the lid comes undone, that it can only fall this far, or at least fall that far away from the physical case itself. The Allen key, on the PVS 14 arm could be an Allen key flathead, so that you can tighten it with the back of a casing. That'd have been nice. That'd have been a nice change. But they do provide the Allen keys that you need, and you open it up and you're like, man, there's 3 Allen keys here, or 3 tools. Why do I need 3 tools? I found that that the 3 tools were for all the various configurations, and part of it has to do with making sure you're compatible with the other accessories you might have. So I found that that when I actually got into it, that the multiple tool choice made sense. The articulation's about 180 degrees, but it's not more than 180 degrees. If you're familiar with the DT and VSs, they kind of roll up. This kind of only rolls out. But I found the articulation still stayed out of my way, and I was able to get it out of my center line when I needed it to. All right, checking my notes. So after a week of use and me personally killing about 12 pigs with them, it's an improvement over the Pano Bridge. The tension for rolling the thermal out, it stayed tight the whole time. It didn't wiggle loose. The mum rail attachment that they had, I couldn't on the Pano Bridge. If I tighten the locking Allen key on top, if I tighten this Allen key right here on top, I can actually push this mount out and off of the mum rail on my MH25. On the adapter from Arkyne, I can't. So what ends up happening is I get a really solid lockup there. Like I said, the tension was good. Repetitive use, off-road driving, like high speed in plowed fields where you're hitting a lot of the row chatter. It handled that just fine. Being able to hand off to a buddy was nice. The biggest advantage for me was I actually was able to lock out the panning feature. So while painting is nice under dual 14s for a greater field of view, on a thermal, the thermal is so much smaller than the field of view of a PVS 14, and having, even me bumping into a post getting out of a Can-Am, having it locked forward where it could only roll in front of my eyes. I was surprised at how much more enjoyable that made the hunting experience. After a week, the biggest downside is that the widest eye setting for night vision and thermal, I'm all the way out. When they're rolled in, they basically touch. But I can still see. So like, I think that maybe maybe this interpupillary adjustment, it's got some room, but for at least for my eyes, I'm all the way at whatever is available. And then the last kind of downside is I have this very cool Grec X night vision recorder. And unfortunately, while it fits on my 14, the dovetail system interferes with how that mounts. And you can't mount it in any of the other orientations because of the J-arms that are associated with it. So I thought that was a bit disappointing. The last thing, and this is kind of like a little bit of a curioso that I thought people might have, is I have this old school and knockoff dovetail adapter made by Wilcox. It's probably not actually made by Wilcox because I got it on eBay. But this dovetail adapter, all metal, and comes off that bridge and comes on to this one. So the standard that they picked for those dovetails is not a random one. It's a standard that exists by someone for something. I believe this is the old Knight's Armament, the Knight's Armament adapter. But at the very least, it is something that you can use. And it means that it's likely that if I decided that the 3D printed shoes were frustrating or something like that, I might be able to get knockoff metal shoes potentially. And knowing that there is at least that this was built knowing about an existing ecosystem of night vision devices it's kind of cool. But all in all, 13 minutes in, like I said, 12 dead pigs. Been using it for a little over 2 months. I also used it for some night vision driving. I like the symbiote mount. I would recommend it. I think it's a step above. I just wish that they're out of the box. I wish it felt nicer. But you can't argue with it. Actually works. It's actually an improvement. And my Pano Bridge mount is designated as a backup device for my hopefully second helmet build. So y'all have a good day. I hope this was helpful.